October 12, 1944. A railway siding cuts through the Yorkshire countryside, where drizzling English rain falls on weathered wooden platforms. Lieutenant Werner Hartmann steps from a cattle car, his hands bound, exhausted from 3 days of transport across the Channel and through the English countryside. Around him, 200 German prisoners shuffle into formation, men from the 352nd Infantry Division captured after weeks of desperate fighting in Normandy. Werner braces for the worst. Nazi propaganda had been explicit and unrelenting. The British Empire, built on colonial brutality spanning centuries, would show no mercy to German prisoners. Expect beatings, starvation, forced labor unto death. The broadcasts from Berlin had been crystal clear. Better to die fighting than face what the British would do to captured soldiers. The Reich's Ministry of Propaganda had painted vivid pictures of Allied savagery, of democratic weakness masking underlying cruelty. Werner looks around for the brutality he'd been promised. Instead, he sees order that reminds him uncomfortably of German military standards. British guards stand in neat formations, rifles held properly, uniforms clean despite the persistent weather. No shouting, no chaos, just quiet professional military discipline that his own shattered division had abandoned during the desperate retreat through France. A British sergeant approaches, middle-aged with steady eyes that suggest he's seen everything war could offer, and remained unimpressed by all of it. He speaks in accented but comprehensible German, his tone neither cruel nor kind, simply matter-of-fact, soldiers addressing soldiers. You will form orderly lines. You will be searched for weapons. You will then receive water and be transported to the camp. Anyone who causes trouble will be disciplined. Anyone who cooperates will be treated correctly. Is this understood? Werner finds himself nodding before realizing he's taking orders from the enemy. The search proves thorough, but not humiliating. Personal effects are catalogued and stored with bureaucratic efficiency. Wounded prisoners are separated for immediate medical attention. Then comes water. British soldiers moving down the lines with canteens, offering drinks to men who'd been their enemies just days earlier. Werner drinks the water, cold and clean, and realizes with uncomfortable clarity that his first experience of British captivity contradicts every warning he'd received. No beatings, no starvation, just professional military procedure executed with the calm efficiency that characterizes everything British. As trucks arrive to transport them to the camp, Werner overhears 2 British guards talking in English he partially understands. One mentions something about poor bastards, and the other replies, "Jerry or not, they're soldiers. Treat them accordingly." That phrase, "treat them accordingly," would define Werner's next 18 months in British captivity, teaching him uncomfortable truths about the regime he'd fought for and the civilization he'd been taught to despise. By 1944, Britain faces an unprecedented crisis that threatens the nation's very survival. Millions of British men serve in the armed forces across multiple theaters of war from North Africa to Italy, from Burma to the beaches of Normandy. Women have been mobilized for munitions factories and essential industries, forming the backbone of wartime production. The Women's Land Army works tirelessly across the countryside, but their efforts cannot fill the massive gap in agricultural labor that threatens Britain's food security. The countryside suffers most acutely. Britain desperately needs to maximize food production to avoid famine and reduce dependence on Atlantic convoys that face constant attack from German U-boats. Every ton of food produced domestically means one less ship risking the submarine-infested waters between America and Britain. The Battle of the Atlantic rages with deadly efficiency, and Britain's survival depends increasingly on what can be grown on home soil. Agricultural production has declined dramatically since 1939. Traditional farm workers have been conscripted or moved to essential war industries. Machinery sits idle without operators. Crops rot in fields for lack of harvesters. The government estimates that without immediate intervention, Britain faces potential starvation within months. Food rationing has already reached critical levels, with civilians receiving barely adequate nutrition. The government faces a stark calculation. Over 400,000 German and Italian prisoners of war sit in camps scattered across England, Scotland, and Wales, representing a vast and largely idle workforce. The Geneva Convention of 1929 provides clear legal framework. Prisoners, except officers, can be required to work under safe and humane conditions. The decision becomes inevitable and pragmatic. British authorities implement a massive program utilizing prisoner labor primarily for agriculture, but also construction, infrastructure repair, and forestry. The assignments prove practical and essential: harvesting crops, repairing farm buildings, clearing land, maintaining rural infrastructure that keeps Britain functioning. Most prisoners work 8-hour days and receive additional rations for manual labor, creating a system that serves both humanitarian requirements and desperate national need. The implementation shocks German prisoners prepared for the worst. Instead of permanent confinement behind barbed wire, many find themselves transported daily from camps to local farms. There, rather than being chained or watched constantly, they receive tools and instructions from British farmers, often elderly men or those physically unable to fight. Hans Schmidt, an Obergefreiter who'd worked as a clerk before the war, finds himself assigned to a farm in Kent. The British farmer who supervises him proves stern but fair, showing prisoners how to perform tasks properly, expecting competent work, and refusing to tolerate laziness. Yet he also brings tea during breaks and never raises his hand to anyone. We harvested crops, repaired fences, helped with livestock. Hans would later recall, "The work was hard. I was a clerk before the war, not a farmer, but not impossible." The British farmer who supervised us was professional. He showed us what needed doing, expected honest work, and treated us like workers rather than dangerous enemies. This delegation of responsibility creates profound psychological impact. Being handed a shovel instead of shackles, being trusted with tools and given meaningful work, contradicts everything the prisoners had been told about British intentions. The simple act of receiving farming implements represents a fundamental shift from enemy to worker, from threat to contributor. The moment proves transformative for many prisoners. Friedrich Müller, captured at Caen, describes his first day on a Lincolnshire farm. "The farmer, an old man whose sons were fighting in Italy, handed me a pitchfork and pointed to a haystack. No chains, no guards standing over me with bayonets, just work that needed doing and trust that I would do it. I stood there holding that pitchfork, understanding that something fundamental had changed." The work program creates unexpected interactions between German prisoners and British civilians. Farmers who initially view prisoners with suspicion often develop grudging respect for men who work diligently and behave properly. Some prisoners learn English through daily contact with supervisors. Occasionally, British civilians share food or cigarettes, small gestures that contradict German propaganda about British hatred for Germans. These daily interactions humanize both sides. British farmers discover that German prisoners are simply soldiers far from home, not the monsters propaganda had portrayed. German prisoners encounter ordinary British people who treat them with basic decency, undermining years of indoctrination about Allied brutality and democratic weakness. The agricultural work varies by season and region. In autumn, prisoners harvest potatoes, sugar beets, and grain crops. Winter brings forestry work, land clearing, and farm maintenance. Spring means planting, fence repair, and preparation for the growing season. Summer involves cultivation, haymaking, and livestock management. Each season teaches prisoners new skills while contributing essential labor to British food production. Winter brings new challenges and revelations. Werner Hartmann develops pneumonia during his first winter in captivity, a potentially fatal condition given wartime medical shortages. The British medical officer at Camp 174 prescribes sulfa drugs, orders bed rest, and arranges extra rations to aid recovery. A British nurse monitors Werner's condition, adjusting treatment as his condition changes. Within 2 weeks, Werner recovers completely. "They saved my life," he would state matter-of-factly decades later. "I would have died from pneumonia without proper medicine. The British gave me antibiotics, professional care, and time to recover. They didn't have to. I was an enemy prisoner, no value to them, but they treated illness as a medical problem requiring medical solution, not as an opportunity to let prisoners die." The medical statistics document systematic care that contradicts every expectation. Between 1944 and 1946, approximately 80,000 prisoners receive medical treatment. Over 5,000 surgical procedures are performed on prisoners. Mortality from disease remains below 0.3%, actually lower than the civilian population due to camp sanitation and medical access. Medications provided include antibiotics, pain relief, antimalarials, and vitamins. This medical care serves British interests. Healthy prisoners work more effectively and cause fewer administrative problems, but it also demonstrates that Britain values human life, even when that life belongs to enemy soldiers. The professionalism impresses prisoners deeply, showing them a standard of care they hadn't expected and often hadn't received in their own military service. Camp medical facilities operate with the same standards applied to British military hospitals. German prisoners receive dental care, eye examinations, and treatment for chronic conditions. Wounded prisoners undergo surgery when necessary. Mental health receives attention, with counseling available for those suffering from combat trauma or depression related to captivity. December 1944 brings an incident that crystallizes British approach to German prisoners. Camp authorities permit prisoners to organize Christmas services, both Protestant and Catholic. German prisoners decorate a barracks with improvised ornaments, gather for religious observance, and prepare to sing traditional hymns. On Christmas Eve, prisoners assemble for Protestant service. They begin singing Stille Nacht, Silent Night in German. The song drifts across the camp in the cold winter air, carrying memories of home and peace across the barbed wire. British guards standing watch outside stop their patrols and listen in complete silence. When the song ends, several guards quietly applaud. One sergeant enters the barracks afterward and distributes cigarettes and biscuits, not required by any regulation but offered as a gesture of common humanity during the holiday season. "Happy Christmas, lads," he says simply. Werner Hartmann remembers the moment with startling clarity decades later. "We were singing about peace and hope while imprisoned by enemies we had tried to kill. The British guards could have mocked us or forbidden the service. Instead, they respected it. When that sergeant came in with cigarettes saying Happy Christmas, I understood something fundamental had changed. These weren't the barbarians we'd been taught to expect. They were civilized men treating defeated enemies with dignity we hadn't shown anyone during the war." The Christmas service becomes emblematic of British camp policy. Maintain security and discipline, but recognize prisoners' humanity within those constraints. It represents neither cruelty nor weakness, simply decency applied consistently regardless of circumstance. Similar gestures occur throughout the camps. Easter services receive the same respect as Christmas observances. Prisoners organize theatrical performances and musical concerts. Camp libraries provide books in German, including classics and contemporary literature. Educational classes teach English, mathematics, and practical skills. These activities serve multiple purposes: maintaining prisoner morale, preventing disciplinary problems, and beginning the process of reintegration into civilized society. German prisoners permitted to write letters home create opportunities for propaganda collapse to spread beyond the camps. The letters describe adequate food, fair treatment, and humane conditions, directly contradicting Nazi broadcasts about Allied brutality toward prisoners. When families in Germany receive letters stating their captured relatives are healthy and treated correctly, it undermines remaining faith in Nazi pronouncements. Werner's letter to his wife in December 1944 proves typical. "I am well and healthy. The British treat us fairly. We work, we eat, we are not abused. Everything we were told about British cruelty was propaganda. I am safer here than I would be continuing to fight. Do not believe what you hear from Berlin about prisoner treatment." His wife, living in bombed Hamburg, shares the letter with neighbors. The information ripples through her community like stones thrown in still water. If Nazi propaganda about prisoner treatment proves false, what else might be lies? The promises of miracle weapons, the claims of inevitable victory, the justifications for continuing a war that brings only destruction? British authorities understand these letters' strategic value. Allowing prisoners to write home serves multiple purposes. Censors learn about German morale and conditions, while letters undermine Nazi propaganda among German civilians. Each letter becomes a small weapon in the psychological war for German hearts and minds. The censorship process reveals interesting patterns. Prisoners initially write cautiously, expecting harsh treatment if they criticize the Nazi regime. As months pass and fair treatment continues, letters become more open about conditions in captivity and more critical of Nazi policies. Censors note increasing references to British fairness and decreasing loyalty to Nazi ideology. Extended captivity in British camps creates profound ideological transformations among many German prisoners who compare their treatment with Nazi principles they'd been taught to revere. The transformation process proves gradual, but inexorable. Initial shock at humane treatment gives way to grudging acceptance that British aren't the monsters propaganda depicted. This opens fundamental questions. If propaganda about British treatment was false, what else were lies? The racial theories that justified persecution? The claims about Jewish conspiracy that motivated genocide? The entire ideological foundation of the regime they'd fought to defend? Hans Schmidt describes his evolution during captivity. I had time to think without constant propaganda reinforcement. I saw British treating us fairly despite having every reason to hate us. I talked to other prisoners who admitted Nazi ideology was bankrupt. I read British newspapers, heavily censored but still providing information we'd never received in Germany. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt my understanding. I had fought for evil. I had believed lies. The British who defeated and imprisoned me were more honorable than the regime I had served. British authorities recognize this transformation potential and eventually implement formal re-education programs, though many prisoners abandon Nazi beliefs simply through experiencing British fairness, contrasted with Nazi brutality. The daily reality of decent treatment proves more powerful than any lecture or propaganda film. The re-education programs include lectures on democratic principles, screenings of films documenting Nazi atrocities, and discussions about German history and culture separate from Nazi ideology. Prisoners attend voluntarily, though many participate out of genuine curiosity about the society that has treated them so unexpectedly well. When German prisoners begin repatriation in 1946 and 1947, thousands volunteer to remain in Britain temporarily to continue agricultural work. The British government, still facing severe labor shortages, permits prisoner volunteers to stay as civilian workers. Approximately 25,000 German former prisoners remain in Britain through 1948, working on farms and reconstruction projects while living in civilian housing. Hans Schmidt chooses to stay. I had nothing to return to. My city was rubble, my family scattered or dead. Britain offered work, housing, and the possibility of rebuilding life. Many of us stayed voluntarily. We had been treated fairly as prisoners. Perhaps we could build futures here as workers. This voluntary retention demonstrates the remarkable success of British prisoner policy. Men who had fought against Britain choose to remain and contribute to British recovery. The transformation from enemy prisoners to voluntary workers validates the theory that decent treatment creates genuine cooperation rather than mere compliance. The transition from prisoner to civilian worker proceeds smoothly for most volunteers. They receive wages, though initially below standard British rates. Housing improves from barracks to cottages or boarding houses. Freedom of movement increases gradually, with many eventually able to travel throughout Britain. Some marry British women and establish permanent residence. The restrained, fair treatment of German prisoners reflects and reinforces British self-conception about national character and civilized values. Britain sees itself as a bastion of civilization against barbarism, maintaining civilized standards in prisoner treatment, even when dealing with enemies who fought for an explicitly barbaric regime, confirms this self-image and demonstrates moral superiority more effectively than cruelty ever could. Sergeant Major William Thompson, who supervises guards at Camp 174, articulates the philosophy clearly. These men were our enemies. They fought for Hitler, killed our mates, bombed our cities, but they're prisoners now, which means they're our responsibility. We don't abuse them because we're not savages. We maintain order through discipline and fairness. That's the British way. We don't need to beat men to show we've beaten them. The barbed wire does that. This approach creates distinctive camp atmospheres where guards maintain professional distance without descending into cruelty. Orders are given clearly and enforced consistently. Violations result in disciplinary action, typically confinement or reduced privileges, but not physical abuse. The contrast with Nazi treatment of prisoners proves absolute and intentional. Captain Robert Ashford, camp commander at Camp 174, explains the strategic thinking. We're fighting to defend civilization against Nazi barbarism. If we abandon civilized standards in how we treat prisoners, we've lost what we're fighting to preserve. Our restraint, our fairness, our adherence to rules even when dealing with men who fought for evil. This proves we're right and they're wrong more clearly than any propaganda could. The British treatment of German prisoners represents strategic victory beyond mere military defeat of Nazi Germany. Britain demonstrates that civilization can maintain moral standards under war's most extreme pressures. Democratic society can fight total war without abandoning the values that make it worth defending. Victors can treat defeated enemies with dignity, proving strength through restraint rather than revenge. For German prisoners who experience this firsthand, the lesson proves undeniable. Britain defeats them militarily and morally, showing that civilization means far more than Nazi propaganda ever understood. The quiet professionalism, the consistent fairness, the unshakable adherence to standards regardless of circumstance, all demonstrate a form of strength that Nazi ideology cannot comprehend or counter. Werner Hartmann, who lives until 2001, maintains contact with British veterans throughout his life. In a 1995 interview, he reflects with remarkable clarity. The British could have treated us brutally. We had fought against them, killed their soldiers, supported a regime that committed atrocities. They had every moral justification for revenge. Instead, they treated us with firm fairness that taught me more about civilization than 12 years of Nazi education ever did. That restraint, that adherence to standards even when dealing with enemies, that was real strength. The program's success extends far beyond immediate wartime needs. Many former prisoners become advocates for democracy and reconciliation, carrying lessons learned in British camps back to Germany during Reconstruction. They help build the foundation for post-war German democracy, having experienced firsthand what civilized governance actually means. For the thousands of German prisoners who expected brutality but received fairness, who anticipated starvation but received adequate food, who feared torture but experienced professional treatment, the British camps become their first real encounter with functioning civilization. The simple act of being handed a shovel instead of shackles represents a fundamental recognition of human dignity that Nazi ideology had systematically destroyed. The gray English mornings when German prisoners receive adequate food and fair treatment demonstrate a truth more powerful than any propaganda, that real strength includes restraint, that victory doesn't require vengeance, and that treating enemies with dignity when you've defeated them shows greater civilization than any brutality could prove. For Britain, the successful management of 400,000 enemy prisoners with minimal mortality and eventual transformation of many into voluntary workers and democracy advocates proves that civilized values aren't weakness, but the foundation of lasting victory. The quiet decency of British prisoner camps becomes testament to civilization's resilience and strength, showing that even in total war against an explicitly evil regime, democratic nations can maintain the standards that make them worth defending. The shovel handed to a German prisoner instead of shackles becomes a symbol of unexpected humanity in humanity's darkest hour, proof that civilization's true victory lies not in defeating enemies, but in transforming them through the power of consistent decency and unshakable moral standards. Hey there! If you enjoyed this story about an unexpected chapter of World War II history, please consider subscribing to our channel for more fascinating historical content like this. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if it taught you something new, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever heard stories from your own family about wartime experiences that challenged expectations? Your engagement helps us continue bringing you these incredible untold stories from history. Thank you for watching.